My name is Alexis Rodriguez, and I'm a senior at Chapman University, here to talk to you about how the race and ethnicity question in standardized tests and questionnaires is causing a further racial divide. So when we were 8 years old, we were forced to put down what our race and ethnicity was in our standardized tests, especially in California with our standardized testing, the STAR test. So we were in second grade, and we had to answer what race and ethnicity we were. We were able to leave it blank if we had wished, but the most important thing at that point to identify ourselves was our name. Then as we got older, we were just consistently asked that question each year with our standardized tests, to the point where we had to figure out which box and which bubble we fit into. So race is identified as your biological, what you identify as biologically. It's what your genetic tree states. And your ethnicity is the culture, your ancestry, and the language that you identify with and the culture that you've grown up with. So for me personally, I grew up in a very white, Asian, Indian American community. So being Hispanic heritage, I never really saw myself as differently, and I was kind of forced to figure that out. And so that question, the first question that you're asked in its very specific order on the standardized test is, you're either Hispanic or you're not. You're either of Hispanic, Spanish heritage origin or not. And I felt it was a very interesting question to me, because it was either I'm myself or I'm unlike everyone else. And then the next question they ask you is, what is your race, which includes, are you white, are you Asian, are you Native American, or an other, and then I think an Alaskan Native. So for me, it was a very complicated question, and the California State Department of Education states that if you're of Hispanic origin, that you could be of any race. So that's why you are questioned your ethnicity before. So I think we need to look towards more of the census type survey questionnaire, where they identify Hispanic as part of the racial breakdown, and you're not asked, what is your race, what is your ethnicity? You are instead asked, how do you describe yourself? Which I think is, it's best not to even include those words in the question itself. And it just has examples of each breakdown to see, how do you define yourself? Who are you as a person? And less of, are you this person versus this person, when you identify maybe as multiple races like I do, or you don't quite know the difference between ethnicity and race. So I think since we're constantly asked to think outside of the box, it is pointless to put ourselves into a box and forced to define ourselves when we might not know just how to define ourselves in just a single box. So until there's a box marked human, I think that we need to take a step back from looking at the demographics of surveys and questionnaires and reevaluate how we are going to be asking those questions.
So earlier you mentioned the racial divide, and we have these questions obviously since we're in second grade. How does this divide children from second grade, and then how does it change when they hit middle school or high school or even college?
So I think when you're younger, you don't identify yourself and you don't see yourself as different. I mean, I personally didn't. Like I said, I was racially different from the rest of the kids in my classes, but I never thought that, and I never knew that until we all looked at that question when we were asked it for our test, and we're kind of like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be of a different racial background or something, when it just wasn't really a question before and something we never thought about. So we were forced to think about it, and we're forced to continuously choose which box, and I was always really confused which one to put, because I grew up in a certain way, and I didn't like I said, ethnicity is defined as like the customs, language, and ancestry. I had to learn Spanish in classes. I didn't speak it at home. I wasn't in a huge, my customs weren't really in the whole Hispanic community, so to speak. So I kind of was forced to be put inside that box and just kind of figure it out. So it was a topic of conversation that we were all forced to have, which maybe it's a good thing, on the surface level, but then you start seeing yourself as differently, and that's when you start, like, it's a you versus them over there, and then it becomes a group divide, Mm-hmm. So I think it just kind of shows like a racial divide at a young age that we maybe don't need to be looking at until later in life, or maybe we don't even need to have that question at all, and we could figure it out in other ways.
When it comes to seeing that divide in children, how does embracing your own culture, whether it's African American culture or Caucasian culture or Hispanic culture, how does embracing that culture actually reinforce that divide, in your opinion?
So I think that you can have your pride in your culture that you identify with and that you've grown up with, and you can. It is definitely a very complicated situation because you want to be a part of that and you want to have that separation, but I don't think we need to be doing that through by means of standardized test questions and to have that be the box that you tick and that's the reason why your peers see you as differently, rather than having them learn through experience and gain respect for your community through other ways, through history and through classes. But why do we have to have that as part of a standardized test or a survey or questionnaire when I feel like there's more important ways and more thought out ways that we can bring this up to students, especially at a young age, if that's when we're going to be doing it. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
How do you feel when you have to tick a box that identifies with a certain cultural background?
Well, I've always had kind of an issue with it just because I've never known what to put. And by definition from the California State Department of Education, they're telling me that I should be putting Hispanic, but then also my race is white. So because I might have some European background, but then if you're from Central America or South America, then you should be ticking the box as Native American, which I found very interesting. And because I also have a Hispanic heritage, so or a Mexican family, and so I don't know, should I be ticking 2 boxes or should I tick 1 or should I leave it blank? I've left the boxes blank, I've marked white, I've marked other, I've done all of the above. So just never really actually knowing what to put has made me almost frustrated and feeling that ethnicity question should be, it should just be combined because it just doesn't make much sense to me. No one really knows the definitions between ethnicity and race and what the differences are. And so it's been just kind of a bother to me that I'm not included in that that section.
So what you're saying is that racially people are more ambiguous now than they've ever been, and that it's kind of important to realize that rather than necessarily shun it?
Well, it's not even about racial ambiguity. There could be just a person who they just identify as white all their life, but it's more just about a conversation of everyone. There's mixed backgrounds and the stuff that we don't really talk about as much, that people identify with multiple groups. I think it's just not that important that we need to be defining that in that way.
Do you think the data that the standardized tests and college admission applications receive from your racial question, do you think that's beneficial at all to universities or to the State Department?
So I do think that it is important in terms of demographics if that's the information that they need to know. I don't think it's super important for the demographics to be so defined for when we're in elementary school, middle school, and high school, but I know that there are laws that require that information. So yes, I think it is, especially for colleges, to see the admission rates and to see to make sure there's diversity, but we're going to need to reword that question. We need to make it more inclusive, make it more clear